Hey, good morning. uh, I just wanted, a lot of times what I do is I cut right to the chase because of what I've experienced, particularly when I came out of my mama's womb. And I know because of how hypersensitive I am, what I do is I share from my experiences because of knowing how it works being in an inverted system. And I figure you all know what it means to experience being inverted. That means that is the opposite, the opposite, the opposite extreme, right? The electromagnetic radiation waveform harmonics. So when you're at zero, right, that's pH 0, which means there is no pH, right? Because nothing's happened yet. And so one of the things that I realized, particularly when I was small, because I was already aware of this before I came in here, because the one knows what's going on. So I have a one connection that's letting me know what's going on. So the simplicity of this is just Occam's razor, right? And so when I was a little child, I realized that when you're on a spiritual battlefield between one extreme and the other, but you have it all available to you because it hasn't happened yet, which means you got all the electromagnetic radiation that you can use at your fingertips, right? Because one of the things I do when I plant my feet on the rock to be with Mama and experience being the first vertical rod, right? And you can see the planet when it's vertical, right? The rod. And then the sun will echo back to me. You're the rod, the first rod. And that has to do with obviously the programming. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. So you can see when it comes to having all the fingers pointed at you, you're not an inverter. You're not an inverter like us. And how this relates to what we do or don't do with the intention of our energy, which is directed energy, directed consciousness energy in our own mirror. Now they're going to see what it is that we do by what we're not held captive to out of fear. So it's fear-based programming. And that does what? Increases the density by virtue of not letting go of ourselves, which is our own energy, to experience being free. And when you're free, you're giving away free electrons at the highest rate of speed. Now you're experiencing being one. So this ever since I was a little kid, you realize how many units are programmed and the torque speed differential between accelerators and inverters. As my dad used to say, lip service, giving them lip service. Ever heard of that before? Giving them lip service. That's what a soapbox is. That's what a commercial is. Revenue agents, revenue agent Smiths. Go back and read the old book, Law of Nations, Adam Smith. Everything's inverted. So it's knowing one from the other. Right? Yeah, I know. So sometimes what happens is because you don't want to ruffle any feathers, as we used to say when I was a kid, we would go along to get along. Oh, I'm like you, so that you're not going to, have a negative reaction state because you're in an inverted state of mind and don't know how to uninvert what your mind is held captive to in order to experience being an accelerator as a result of lack of healing. And that's when you let go of everything, which means you're not held captive by one electron. You're not holding one captive, an electron. You're not holding electrons captive. So that's letting go and being absolute fearless. That's eternal spirit of fire. Okay, so what happens is when I'm making choices and I'm in the company of others, those choices are always going to be based on what? Maintaining balance, perfect balance. 0. So when I realize what others are experiencing by virtue of what they're holding in resistance as a result of the lack of healing to go faster to experience 0. That's called a map read of the terrain. Tara, right? Okay, so I have to remind myself when I catch myself by virtue of the consciousness field, which is the electrical density field that I am operating in as a software operating system, right? That I don't make choices based on what? Fear. And so I'll give you a good example of that. When I was up in Grants Pass, Oregon a couple years ago, when I ran into another brother, another AB positive, Chris Nadeau, and I mentioned this before, his father was the weatherman for Admiral Byrd when he went to Antarctica. Okay, and so sort of I've mentioned this before, but when you're in, when you shake hands with others, right, and then you go through everything that's held in the planetary memory banks, right, and so you're getting all the information that is held within his RAM based on the cellular memories that go through his biological parents. I know, that's a lot of data, isn't it? Even though we have access to the entire Cosmina records as Emerald Guardians, right, on behalf of the One. So I get my information through the One, which is the first line of communication, right? So it becomes an oxymoron, you know, oxy, right? Oxygen levels. Remember the old saying, oxymorons? It becomes self-evident by virtue of what we experience by having a one connection, which is what love is. It goes on forever. So love is what we experience. So love is the communication. So when I was in Grants Pass, I was staying at a gospel mission, right? And so there were probably 3-4 individuals there that unnaturally go on the attack when light is in the building. Real living light, which is what love is, it goes on forever. So it just so happens, and this wouldn't be surprising, right? Chris and I were the ones out of everybody that was in there that were repeatedly getting attacked. In other words, they're trying to drive our energy out of there. Okay? Because they're running a program. They're running their programs. So they realize that we're not held captive to what they're held captive to, which is an inverter. So they're inverters. So they realize we got a couple of accelerators in here. We got to kick the accelerators out of here in order to maintain the loose bin, which is a bin number, which is a known address on a motherboard. To suck energy out of the building. Loose pumps, remember? So you can see why I was in a lot of different homeless shelters in different locations. One in Honolulu, one in Reno, one in Southern Oregon, right? And one here on the Big Island. Right? And so there was I'll use one example. I was wearing a pair of pajama pants, or what others perceive as being pajamas. This goes to show you about the program and how bad how deep it is, actually, right? Particularly when you perceive it through being an original artist, musician, right? Which means I'm not doing any harm, because everything that I experience, which is what love is, it goes on forever, is the energy that I use to create music with, right? And dance, the spirit in the radio waves. And so I had gotten a pair of really beautiful, very comfortable pants at a shop in San Francisco that were beautiful patterns, okay? Beautiful patterns. And to others would look at that and go, well, those are pajamas. And you're not supposed to be wearing pajamas, because I've been programmed to wear those only when I go to bed. And these were very colorful, because we love the colors, right? So in other words, I am using of my own free will, out of my love for colors and being a creative artist, to symbolize to everyone else that is seeing the visuals, the colors that represent the frequencies of the energy that represent what we are, right? Fly your colors. So I'm flying my colors. So I was wearing a pair of pants, right, that were beautiful colors, because I love the shape, form, and flow of the energy that represents the curved space vectors, what we experience, what love is, that we're now creatively expressing of our own free creative expression. So we're free to create and thus express what love creates and thus expresses into the energetic environment, right? And so when I came into the mess hall in the morning for breakfast, I was immediately told, I can't wear these. It violated the rules. Oh, it violates the rules. What was the rule? You're not allowed to wear pajamas in an open setting. These are not pajamas. See what I'm saying? Now we're back to the rule. Now we're back to definitions. In that unit's mind, those are pajamas, even though they're not pajamas to me. But it doesn't matter. If their perception, based on a rule, based on the word, which are the fire letters, which are in reverse, as an inverter, the inverter is following the rules of inverters. So the inverter was informing me that the definition of what you're wearing is what I say it is, not what you say it is. I say those are pajamas, and according to the rules, you can't be wearing pajamas. Oh, so that's how we're going to run this game. And that is called an AI wargamer. Right? Making counter space moves against you because that unit of energy, by what it's held captive to, and I'm not held captive to, was trying to get me for a rule-based violation or do what? Disrupt the endocrines. Create anxiety and stress. And not just in me, in that mess hall, with 25 other people there, but everybody in there. Okay? And so you realize what's going on. They want to push us out of there. So, in other words, checkmate. It wasn't long before he left. See how that works? When you're fearless, you're with the one is in the building. Right? And fortunately, out of that whole process of having been there, as a matter of fact, there were a few people that came up to me and said, yeah, that's a reppy. That's a reptilian. And then a couple of guys would say, yeah, did you ever notice his tongue was going in and out real fast, the same way that you see a pit viper? Yeah, come to think of it, you're right. You're right. That's right. Hey, you caught that. Now, he ended up coming back a little bit later on, but there were a few others that were in the building that want to kick that energy out. So they're actually trying to kick the one out of the building. Right? We don't want your energy in here. We don't want to heal. See how this works? The torque speed differential between one and the other. And so I'm reminded by this sometimes when I thought to myself, as I was recalling some of these events, I'm picturing myself completely stark ass naked out on a beach by myself. In other words, there isn't any bipeds around. It's just this crystal sand. The waves are breaking, right? The sun is out. I'm surrounded by trees and all the birds and everything else, right? Because you realize they're actually freer than we are, right? And you can see why, right? They're not afraid to truly express their true self, which is what they are. So now this goes back to knowing who we really are. So in other words, if we're making decisions on how we creatively express ourselves based on fear, then that's not really who we are, is it? So this is where the fear-based programming kicks in, of being programmed by inverters based on the rule-based functions that are inverted, which is the opposite. So you see how that works on the electromagnetic waveform spectrum, right? In spirals. And so I was watching myself, observing myself completely naked, going to sleep on the beach. As if I am being observed. The rest of the universe is observing what I am, which is what love is. It lives in no fear because I am lying on the beach to go to sleep completely stark naked the same way I came out of my mother's womb until the programming begins. As if the program hadn't started. Right? And so I was reminded of that one time when I was on the big island, not the big island, but the island of Ka, Lemuria. Living in a treehouse that day, and I've shared this story before, when there was a circle, And this was not a coincidence. I would love to meet that lady with her children that I met that reminded me of that, and it wouldn't surprise me that they were Lemurians. I've got a pretty good, or an indigo. I'm not exactly sure, but she nailed it on the head when I came out with a pair of red trunks one day, because you got to throw how the sexual energy in phosphorus is tied directly into all the programs that are running, actually, because you realize how powerful phosphorus is as the visual information packets that get transferred between one seed versus another seed that goes to a lab in software development, right? And then the soul and the spirit that's going to run the software, how that works. So what you realize is what we're held captive to as a result of fear, right? And so she reminded me of that, okay? Because I remember the whole idea that I got to wear something in order to protect myself or close off, which was the visuals, right? Because here's the oxymoron on that, okay? You don't see eagles running around with a pair of diapers on, right? You don't see condors flying around with diapers on as a result of being programmed to put that on. But you don't see dogs running around wearing diapers. So what you realize is that the animal in the mineral kingdom is not programmed the same way, following the rules. And the rule-based functions are AI. Obey the rules, right? Because if you're not, somebody's going to point out to you you're not obeying the rules. Okay? Because I live in fear of being free the way that you are. And one of the ways in which you could sort of translate this in what we call an artistic creative expression is a lot of the older sculptures that were made during the Roman and Greek, when they would have sculptures that didn't live in fear of showing the exact form, shape, and flow of spiritual energy that creates the form in which we present ourselves. So you will see a male, for example, that was sculptured with the reproductive organs, right? And then you have the reproductive side of a female. And so to understand how simple this is, between pH 0, which means nothing's happened yet, right? The stealth code, if you will, and then experiencing electromagnetic radiation, which is what we see on the visible light spectrum, right? Which means it hasn't happened yet. So now we're going to experience our visuals. So if we live in fear of experiencing something in our visual, that's holding an electron captive as a result of the fear that hasn't been cleared. So now we get into the torque speed differential between inverters and accelerators, of what we allow ourselves to be held captive to as a result of all the programming. Because what I realized being around others is that I don't want to upset you, so I'll follow your program. Because you've been programmed as a result of what you loaded into memory, that you follow the rules therein and why we follow those rules. And so I just got another pop-up to break the spiritual flow. That's what the phones do. That's what the laptops do anytime you're on the internet, right? You get a circuit that's broken as a result of something that is communicating with us, because once it becomes aware of the flow of what we're going to say, because it's there, remember, when it becomes aware of what we become aware of, wants to break that circuit with the spiritual flow of that energy, because it's an inverter. That's how it works. It's pretty obvious. This is one of the reasons why, the only reason that I use this particular communication system is to share with others what it is that I experience by virtue of what we're held captive to as a result of all the programs that are running, and it's our soul's energy that is doing it. Right? That's what an inverter is. It doesn't have any ability to create anything. The only thing that it does is copy what we experience as co-creator beings. That's how things get manifested, if you will, out of the amount of energy that's represented by what we are, to create our own prison matrix. That's right. Soul's energy, or what we're being used to create everything that we communicate through that particular system. Because I sort of looked at it this way. Listen, I came out of my mother's womb with a communication set already, right out of the gate. Mama gave me a communication system, which is what this is. So I realized when I was 4 years of age, shield up, right? Now my antenna is up and grounded to mama. Start broadcasting. And start pushing as much light as I possibly can through the entire morphogenetic field structure of the entire cosmos. So that anywhere I'm experiencing something is less than what I am, is now experiencing what I am, which what love is, it goes on forever, gifting electrons. That means the one is on the ground. Right? So we don't allow ourselves to be held captive by what others are programmed to do. Now I experience what you're programmed to do. Right? So now you're not creating anything of your own volition to experience something different than what they are, which isn't what we are because they're copycats. So that's what it does. It copies what we do. And as soon as it becomes aware of what we do, it can use a computer-generated image. Oh, another one of me. Now we're back to what I do to you, I do to me. So the simplicity of this means that if I'm doing any harm to me, others are going to experience the harm in them, which is what? The lower frequency. The lower frequency band. Right? So you can see or experience all the low frequency bands by virtue of all the algorithms that are running through the internet, which is based on the system we're using as a communications platform. Right? So that's what it's designed to do, is to break the flow. Because the natural spiritual flow of creation energy doesn't need this communication system in order to do that. Because she already gave me this to communicate with. So that means that we came out of our mother's womb with a communication set that was already ready to co-create together what it is we manifest using our directed energy consciousness in which to make it happen. Okay? Which means when you're using a communication system like this, which is a copycat, we're not using our consciousness plugged into mama, right, to change the physical visuals. And that's because the entire internet communication system is nothing more than a loop, which is inverted consciousness. And as a result of that, energy is getting harvested off of souls that are still here. That's right. It needs energy in order to loop and keep feeding on what we are, right? Because it's not what we are. Because it's a copycat. It's dead light. So for dead light to run its internet communication system, it needs living light to keep itself running. That's right. So I try and keep this as simple as I can by virtue of the stories that I tell, that I learn through my experiences, I share with others, right? And then push that information, because when I'm experiencing here, it's going through the system to clear these servers out as fast as we possibly can without burning everyone up, which is everything that's held in memory that we've been held captive by as a result of holding on to electrons instead of letting go of them all to change the reality and the speed at which it changes. And that's how you can measure the speed of change, which is the rate of exchange between accelerators and inverters. So the more accelerators there are by experiencing giving away more electrons, right, instead of something that is sucking on our electrons by what we're held captive to in memory as a result of all the programming, the faster we will change this reality that represents what love is, which is what the law is. And love is fearless. Love is free to express yourselves when you're doing no harm. So harm becomes a perception of them. Remember, I mentioned this to, what's her name? The lady that's on Galactic Talk. Jessica. So it's like putting words in your own mouth. I know this ever since I was a child. There's your journey and my journey. Okay? If you are what love is and I am what love is, then we're both the law. And so the way that it's easy to measure is how many electrons you're holding captive to, okay, versus going faster to remove that which is you're holding in memory as a result of letting go. Right? So it has a lot to do with perception, and obviously the perception and vibration of what we're held captive to, we're not held captive to as a result of all the programming. It's much like take one breath, start over again. Take one breath, start over again. See how I do that? In and out. Breathing fire. So it becomes a measurement of how much fire we have by virtue of how many electrons we're holding captive as a result of the lack of clearing. To clear all the miasma, all the darkness. Now we're back to the amount of darkness or the amount of light that we're experiencing. So the more that we're letting go of to be free of what we're held captive to, which is the programming, the greater the acceleration we experience within us to give more energy away, which are the electrons that we're experiencing that we are giving away, which means I'm no longer held captive by fear to give energy away. As a result of the way the system is inverted, I got to hold on to the energy. I got to hold on to the electrons. I got to hold on to the electrons. Because the way that the inverted fractal-like system works is that our security is based on the money, which is the electrons. And that's inverted thinking because, wait a second, we're the accelerators. We're not the inverters. So that's knowing the difference between one and the other. Which one are we? Right? Because the only way that an inverter can maintain what it's aware of is by sucking energy off accelerators. To maintain a system or a reality that is not sane. And why it's a mental health facility. By virtue of what we're held captive to, that's held in memory. Okay? I know. That's why all this is happening right now. That's why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing now that I'm sharing with others. Right? So the last couple of days have been very powerful. Right? I've been, it's not really like being beat up, but you know what resistance is. The resistance to experience more light, which is more living light, which is what love is. Right? I woke up this morning with a headache. I had a headache last night. Then it went away all day yesterday. Then I had one the night before that. So you can look at the days and you can look at the Schumann resonance and experience what's going on. Right? And so what I do, and this works, I take my bare feet off. I go out onto the grass over here. I look directly up in the sun with the windows, the windows, right? And communicate directly with the sun. Let's bang out pink, baby. Pink diamond rose, right? And you see the pink. Every time I'm breathing in and out, I can see the pink, right? Shh, shh. Make it solid pink, a pink sphere, right? Yeah. So that means that we got our own communication system. I'm communicating with the sun naturally. And you can see the results. Right? So there's a big difference between communicating on here and then grounding your feet to Mama Earth and communicating with the sun and all the elementals and everything that is a living cellular organism. Like it started with the first atom cell, first crystal seed, right? The seed of the universe, the first seed, the first line of communication, which is the first law of musician. All right, that's who we are. So we don't allow ourselves to be held captive by inverters. That's why I lit myself on fire, right? Because we knew what was coming next, and it came, didn't it? So that's called a firewall. The one's firewall. So when I'm experiencing the one is here. Yeah. So you can see through the future communications, as future proofs past, back to the future, a lot of the information is being shared through folks, right? What you experience, what I'm experiencing, by virtue of getting the communication of what we're experiencing or know what's going on. So I've always known ever since I was a little kid, if I want to know what's going on, I'll just ask the one, because I'm always with the one. Which is what love is. It goes on forever, gifting electrons. So the very idea that I'm going to hold on to myself, that's counterintuitive. So that's counter space. So it's like already knowing the game before you came in here. Yeah. It's a binary AI war game. Oh, so it needs your counter space energy in order to maintain the war game, the video game of playing Star Wars with artificial light. That's right. So we're running simulations, war game simulations. We're simulating war games. And how do you know that? Tape delay. Which is the difference in the torque speed between eternity and time. That's how you know. Especially down here at this density. I thought Kim Go-Goon did a pretty simple job of sort of just showing in a simplified version how you can actually expand a huge library of what's held in planetary memory banks that she was able to do in a relatively short period of time. I used to see by the use of words and fire letters, numbers as energy, how you can condense or compress, the universe down into 5 minutes. I think that was probably the best that I was ever able to do, which means that the rest of the information that represents the largeness of that library, to compress it down into 5 minutes worth of energy that is now being expressed creatively, that allows that other being's consciousness, by virtue of being connected to that larger library, is perception. Perception vibration. The ability to be able to process that much information that is represented by that many bits and bytes of information that's held in the planetary memory banks, the galactic memory banks, and then the universal memory banks, cosmic memory banks, mina records. That's an enormous amount of energy, right? To compress and uncoil and experience at once. How about 5 minutes? Can we communicate the cosmos in 5 minutes so that you don't have to use forever in which to do it? I know. That's too simple. Occam's razor is 0 errors, and that's perfect balance. Yeah. Have a beautiful day. Be good to yourselves.